Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pastor's Post. I apologize last week. I was not able to get a video out. My grandma passed away. It was kind of one that we saw coming. In fact, actually I had started preparation numerous times on what to preach for her funeral and never really got around to it until the week of. Like literally the day before the visitation, I wrote out a bunch of thoughts that I'd kind of gathered throughout the years. She was older, she was ready to go, she was in a lot of pain, so it was kind of a relief for my family. I do appreciate your continued prayers during this time because I know some families taking it a lot harder than others. But as the pastor in the family, I was asked to do the service. And so I thought, what would be a good video based off of this experience? And hopefully I'm going to have actually a few of these dealing with funerals. And I know many of you who watch, you're experienced pastors and you've got your own opinions, you've got your own order of services and graveside things that you want to say in your own approach. And I always value, I appreciate your input in the comments. So if you want to leave one of those, by all means, feel free to do so. This is what I did. This is what worked for me. And I want to, like I said, I'm going to do a few videos. Actually, tonight, I'm going to try and record them all. And over the next few days, edit and process and all that stuff. Some of them. But for the beginning one, what I want to just do right now is give you an order of service to go off of. Now, many of you are going to find these in your pastor's handbook, your minister's handbook. I don't know where mine's at. I think I might have left it in Illinois or something. Anyway, I'll find it by the next video. It's not still in Illinois. I know where it's at. Anyway, I know many of those give us some kind of order of service. You can find one online. Well, this is online, and there's always something else you can get. But what I try to do when I do a funeral is simply this: make the last memory of the deceased a good one. You do not want to be there for 2 hours for a funeral. I normally preach for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. That's my preaching line. I don't even do that. I trim it down to around 25, 30 minutes and try and keep it in that ballpark. A lot of reasons. A, your funeral's typically going to happen in the middle of a weekday, and some folks are going to have to get back to work. B, again, you do not want the last memory to be a bad memory. And C, not everybody's going to really even be remembering or thinking about that message at all come the next day. But what you want to give them, you want to hit hard, you want to hit fast, and you want to hit lovingly. You want to make sure your points are there and they are comforting, but also challenging. Fourth thing, always make sure you present the gospel. You are not preaching unless you are preaching a Christ-centered gospel message in one way or another. Jesus said, all the scriptures testify of him. I love how Alistair Begg says it. I'm probably going to butcher the quote, but it's something to the effect of, the Old Testament predicted him, the Gospels revealed him, the epistles, Acts, in Acts he was preached, in the epistles he's explained, and in Revelation he's expected. So all of Scripture points us to the cross of Christ. So make sure you do that. Now, for my order of service, I just do something like this. You're going to have family members who every country song grandma listened to, they want that in the funeral. Thankfully, my family did not do that to me. In fact, it was kind of like pulling teeth to get them to give any kind of input at one point. Thank God for my uncle's wife who just started throwing out ideas, because it was like, okay, I'm just going to do this if you guys don't say anything. And it ended up being a beautiful funeral. And I'll talk more about that in a later video. Anyway, first thing I do, I always try to have music of some kind, a song, a special, something that as people are getting settled, they know, okay, it's about to start. Now, if they have 20, 30 songs they want played, Have that as entrance music while people are getting seated. Have that as outro music while people are getting seated. But have one specific song. If a relative sings well and they're going to do a special, have them do that to begin the service. Have them do that in the middle of the service, or have them do that at the end of the service. Okay, so that's the first thing. You're going to start, and in the middle and in the end, have a special song. You don't have to have these things, okay? You don't have to have a middle if you don't want to. But almost everybody has two favorite songs that reminds them of them, or speaks to the situation, or something like that, that they want played at the funeral. Be respectful of that. Be respectful of the family. Again, you want the last memory to be a good one. It's not your time to shine. It's time to love on and bless a grieving family, okay? Even if that family is your own. Then I would just do typically a welcome, something like, hey, the family, the blank family wants to thank you for your prayers and your acts of kindness during this time. We want to welcome you to this celebration of life, or this funeral service to honor the passing of so-and-so, that sort of thing. You're just basically thanking those who've shown up and welcoming them and acknowledging the service is now underway. Then you're going to maybe do an opening prayer or something like that. You don't have to do an opening prayer. I tend to wait on the opening prayer until what I would call the business session of the whole thing to be over with, and that's the reading of the obituary. So you have your opening song, your welcome, and then the reading of the obituary. This is the official, take this from the newspaper, from the funeral home. I would recommend going over this with the deceased spouse, the deceased kids. Make sure there's nothing else specific they would like added in for the funeral service. Funny story about mine. I had a family member who was going to read the obituary, and I had gone through this with my grandfather. The 2 nights before the visitation, he and I sat down for about 30 minutes. We walked through the obituary, and I said, is there anything else, Grandpa, you want added in? No, that's fine. That's good. Okay. So I asked this family member to read the obituary, and at that time they said, okay, I'd be happy to do that. I'll help out. I didn't want it to be, because it's my family, I didn't want it to be the Jeff show, right? And so I wanted to include other grandkids, great-grandkids, things like that as best I could. This person texts me like around midnight, the night before the visitation, so later that night, telling me how this is what the obituary was going to be now. And there was a lot of stuff added. There was some misinformation in there they were not aware of. It was, to be frank, it was not the obituary my grandpa wanted. So the next day I kind of took him aside and said, hey, you're going to read the obituary I gave you, okay? That's what Grandpa wants. Oh, but it doesn't say this, and it leaves out that. And I don't care, okay? I don't come to your job and tell you what to do. This is what the family wants. This is what her spouse wants. We're going to honor that. Now, in most cases, you're going to be the one reading the obituary. But in a case like that, you want to make sure this is what the family actually wants. Please be respectful of that. You may be the aunt or the uncle or the grandkid or the child who wants to make sure that you honor them. That's not your time to do that. This is the time for everybody. Make sure, one thing I brought up to my relative was, you know what? Make sure that you leave stuff to talk about after the funeral. You're going to have a family meal. You're going to have a get together, and you want to have stuff to talk about during that time as well. Leave those things for those things, so there's more coming together as a family and honoring the person. Okay, so after the obituary, then you might have someone read a scripture verse. Maybe it's the person's favorite verse. You're not preaching out of that. It doesn't have to be the verse you're preaching from. In my grandma's case, she had an old Bible that she'd had for years, and I noticed many of the verses she underlined had to do with love, loving your neighbor, loving your family, things like that. So we tried to honor that. And the verse, I had my cousin read from John 15, 12, and 13. Love your neighbor as yourself. Greater love is no one than this. He laid down his life for his friends, whatever. That was the actual text. Now, my actual preaching text was out of 1 John 4, 15 through 21. I'll get to that in a second. But my cousin came up. He said, I don't like to do public speaking, so I'll just get up there and I'll just read it. So I screenshot the verse. I said, just read this. I didn't even put that it was John 15, nothing like that. I said, just read this. He came up and I could tell he was very emotional. It was very hard for him. My grandma and him were very close our whole lives. He did a phenomenal job. He did a great job. He read through it, and then he went back and he sat down. So again, he didn't try to read out of some wackadoo Passion Translation or anything like that. He just followed the script, and that's good. That's what you want people to do, okay? So you make the script simple. And then after that, I opened in a word of prayer, and that's what I would recommend. That's where I would typically have the welcoming prayer, the opening prayer, either before or after that official scripture verse. And then if you have another song, my grandma, when we were all little kids, from the time the song came out until I graduated high school, she lived about 30 minutes from the rest of us. So if we were going out to her house for the weekend, she had this old cassette tape in her car. She'd pop it in, and it was Alabama's Angels Among Us. My grandma loved that song. Now, you might understand the theological implications of that song and have some kind of issue with it. It's not your funeral. It was my grandma's. It was my family's chance to grieve and honor her. So we played that song. Now, I don't have a problem with the song. Whatever. Paul says we entertain angels unaware. Whatever. So we played that song. It was good. And there were a lot of us who remember my grandma playing that song and singing along with her to that song. Then, like I said, after that, then we got into the sermon message, and it was good, I think. I mean, I felt it was good, and I'll talk more about preaching a funeral in a later video. But then when the message was over, I did a closing prayer, and there was one more song, Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone, one that my grandma liked towards the end of her life. And so we played that song as the funeral directors came in and ushered people out. Now, you may not have something exactly like that, okay? Then you're going to go to the graveside, by the way. You're going to ride with the funeral director. You're going to go to the graveside, and you're going to do your last words, and I'll do another video about that as well. But when you are doing this, keep in mind these three things, okay? First, most important, it is not about you. It's about the deceased and their family. You are there to bring comfort. You are there to bring encouragement. You are going to use this opportunity to give them the gospel. You are going to use this time to preach to the living, not to the dead. One of my biggest pet peeves is when I hear a pastor say, I won't even do a funeral if I think the deceased might be in hell. Well, that's your prerogative, but I'm going to evangelize and I'm going to preach. Paul says, do the work of the evangelist. I'm going to preach to the living so that they might make it to heaven. And so make sure you do that, but do it in a loving way. Don't try and force things in. Be very firm, but very loving in your message. 2, be sensitive to the family. You're not going to come in and say, okay, here's the deal, guys. 3 songs, that's it. Okay, that's Jeff's rule. That doesn't have to be your rule. Maybe you do a 4th song. Maybe you have family come up and speak. There's always time for that too. That would be something to do maybe after the obituary, have someone come in and share a family memory. Again, you don't want to have, maybe they have 6 kids. You don't want all 6 of them to come up and share their thoughts. Try to limit it, 1 or 2, maybe 3 at the most, and try and space that out a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. But make sure it is for the family, not one individual of the family, the whole family. I know some families, the black sheep loves to come in and kick up dust and all these problems, burn it to the ground, and then they're out the door, and everyone goes, okay, they just ruined the funeral. Funny story, I did another relative's funeral years ago. This was kind of the case. I had this one relative who has since passed, thank God. I know that sounds harsh, but they tried to make the entire funeral about themselves. This is not even your funeral. This is your sister's funeral, and you're doing this. Don't allow that to happen. As the pastor, as the one leading the service, do not allow that to happen. Be there for the family as a whole, okay? You're going to have, that person's a black sheep for a reason, right? Just try and usher them out or get them out of the way. It's not their show. It's not their time. It's about the deceased and about the family. Try and let that go. 3rd, you have to live with what you've done, right? So make sure you are preaching and teaching and doing this whole thing in a way when it's over, you can say, I gave them all I had. And it may not be good enough for some. It may be that some were really offended that you tried to wedge your agenda by preaching the cross at grandma's funeral or something. If that's the case, so what? But you have to answer to God for your message. You have to answer for how you preach that day. So give it what you've got and do it in love, do it with compassion, and again, do it in a way that you can love the whole family. All right, with that said, that's the first video. Order a service for a funeral. Opening song, welcome, maybe the obituary, then a specific verse, and then a prayer, and then another song, then or solo or special, something like that. Then the message, then the closing special songs, whatever. And then everybody go to the funeral home or sorry, the graveside. You're getting in the car with the funeral home most of the time. That's been my experience, okay? The funeral director, you're riding with them to the grave. And we'll pick up that in the next video, what to say at the graveside. All right. God bless you guys. Have a great rest of your week.